Hello and welcome to another video here on Powerdojo. In this video, we're going to have a look at the difference between calculated column and measure. We're going to have a look at how to create a calculated column, how to create a measure, what are the differences between the two, and which one you should prefer based upon your requirement, based upon the size of your data set, etc. For this demonstration, we're going to have a look at a data set which is a small data set which only has 22 rows. So we have listed all the former FIFA World Cup champions since 1930 to 2022, which was 2 years ago. First column we have the year, second column is the country that won that edition's World Cup, and the third column is the confederation to which they belong to now. For instance, Italy, as we know, belongs to the UEFA Confederation. Uruguay, Brazil belong to the CONMEBOL, which is the South American Football Confederation. First up, we're going to have a look at how to create a calculated column. In most cases, you can create them, add them to your data set while you are transforming your data in Power Query. But for the demonstration purposes, I'm going to create a calculated column in the Power BI report. Right now, as you can see, we are in the table view. In the table tools tab, you will see an option where we can create a new column. So let's call it continent. So we're going to use a if dax function where if the value in the configuration column is UEFA, the value that should be returned should be Europe, and if it's false, it should be South America. Now in this case, since we only have had champions from two continents or two confederations, this makes our task very easy. So now you can see Power BI was able to first of all create this column continent, and it was able to populate all the rows with the values corresponding to a condition. So this is how you can create a calculated column using DAX function. Now if we were to go to the report view, we have already created few visuals where we have a card visual with the total number of editions that have been played so far and a column chart of the various countries that have won the World Cup so far. So if we were to have a look at the data tab on the right, we can see our calculated column has appeared in the data set now. It can be identified by this icon, table column, and FX near it. Now, I can use this calculated column as a filter. For instance, I can, let's say, add a slicer like this, and I can choose, let's say, Europe or South America. And you can see the other visuals on the report get updated as per my selection. Not only that, I can go select one visual. For this example, let's select the column chart, and I can add in the filters pane a filter on continent. So let's choose Europe for this instance. So now you can see the visual has updated itself as per the filter that we applied. Not only that, I can apply filter on the whole page. For instance, if you were to click on a blank space on your report page, you will see this filter pane appearing, in which you have an option of filter on this page. So I'll choose our calculated column one more time. Now if I have to select South America, for instance, so you'll see the slicer visual has been updated, the card visual has been updated. We don't have any values in the column chart because we already had a filter on the column chart where we had selected Europe. That's the reason it's not showing any. So we're going to remove these filters on the page and on our visual. Now for the calculated columns that we just saw, you now have to consider two separate cases. The first, if you are connected to your data using import mode, the calculated columns are evaluated at the time the data is refreshed. Then they are stored alongside the other columns in the model. Now, if they are stored in the model, this means that they take up space. Therefore, the more the calculated columns you use, the heavier your model will become. So you need to understand that they must be used wisely and avoid using them in multiple cases for performance reasons. The second case is when you are connected to your data using direct query. These calculated columns are made on the fly when the data needs to be mobilized. It is important to keep this in mind, especially if you use complex formulas in DAX and you observe performance issues. Now we move to the second segment of this video, which is measures. Measures are another way to do calculations using the DAX language in Power BI. As you saw earlier, the calculate column allows you to do calculations row by row. Now, if you want to do aggregation calculations, such as, for example, calculate the number of World Cups after 1960. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to go to my report view and click on new measure. And I'm going to put in a DAX measure, let's call it after 1960. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the calculate DAX function. We're going to use the expression of count. Let's choose world champions year as the column name. Close the bracket. And for the filter, we'll use world champions year column and say greater than 1960. Now if we were to close the bracket, let's see what happens. Since Power BI returned to us no errors, this means this DAX measure is working just fine. Now on the right, you will see that a new element has appeared in our data set. It has this calculator icon near it and with the name after 1960. So this represents that measure that we have just added. Now, can I use this in our visual in our Power BI report? Of course I can. Create a new card visual and select our DAX measure. So you'll see after 1960 there have been 16 editions of the World Cup. When we return to the model view, we noticed that no data was added to our table when we created this measure of after 1960. And that's normal. Our measure is evaluated when it is called upon. So the results that are returned, they do not use storage, which is a big difference with the calculated columns. Because now let's imagine we have a data set which has, let's say, 2000 or 3000 rows or even more. If we were to create a calculated column, or let's say even we have a column that just exists, you have to imagine that you will have to store all this data, which is not the case when you have a measure. In general, you can remember that it is better to use measures instead of calculated columns when you have the choice. I'm going to go back to my report view and let's say we will add a table visual like this. For the columns, I'm going to choose country, year. I'll change instead of sum to count, and I'll add the third column, which is after 1960, the measure that we have just inserted. So this is how our table visual looks like. Now you need to remember the measure that we added is the third column, which is after 1960. You'll see all the rows have both values except Uruguay because it hasn't won a World Cup after 1960. And you can see the difference between total number of editions and the total number of editions after 1960. So what exactly has happened is our measure took into context in which it was evaluated by the number of championships or number of World Cups. Moreover, in this visual, we decided to filter it by a point in time, which is 1960. And since we decided to display the country next to the total number of World Cups they have won, so this measure displays the total number of World Cups taking into consideration the context in which it was evaluated. In this case, all World Cups after 1960. In summary, calculated columns are evaluated in the context of the row, whereas the measures are evaluated in the context of the filter that is applied. Now I have created this slide in which you can see the difference between calculated column and measure. Just remember that calculated column takes up space, uses up plenty of memory, whereas measure are calculated on the fly. If you want, you can pause the video over here to understand the difference. And lastly, I'm just going to share another slide with you for the best practices. Always use calculated measures for dynamic calculations because they are context aware, because they take in consideration the context, the filter that you apply. If you require, you can pause the video right over here. And with that, we have arrived at the end of this video where we saw the difference between calculated column and measure. which one is better, which one you should use in order to optimize the performance of your Power BI report. Let me know in the comments below of what you thought about this video. Do not forget to like and subscribe. I will see you in the next video.